Well, let's see here. I'm about 62 years old here, I guess, and I've been canoeing on Kennerdell County waterways since about early 1970, 69, 70. After I got out of service, I've been canoeing on Big Sandy pretty much most of my life, sometimes more, sometimes less. It's probably my favorite little creek in the county because it's easy to get to, easy access. Little 1 hour trips from Remelton down to Polk, and 1 hour trip from Polk down to Old Route 8, and then another 1 hour trip down to the river approximately. So you get easy access to the creek. First time I ever floated any of the creeks around here, my brother and I and some friends floated Big Sandy. We had borrowed some sports bow canoes from down in Edmonton when they manufactured them. They were not made for Big Sandy Creek, I can tell you that. They were a bit beat up and they weren't too happy when they got returned, but that started a kind of a love affair with the waterways in Kennerdell County. So my kids, my mother grew up in Remelton, and she was always fussed up about me taking my kids on Big Sandy for fear that they would drown, and I always told her that one of the first things I told the kids, try standing up before you start swimming so you don't hurt yourself. We had a lot of fun. I don't know, we canoed mainly day trips. We did have one overnight camping excursion back when Liza was about 6 and she's 4 maybe, I guess. And it was one of those deals where keep your shoes on, watch where you're walking. Well, needless to say, ended up tramping on a water snake who wasn't happy, bit her on the ankle, and she's never been a big snake fan since then. But we've got a lot of mileage out of that canoe trip, and it was one where Dad was there and the kids were there and some of my cousins and brother, I don't know, but we had fun, but yeah, we ended up with a trip to the emergency room after everything was all said and done. But it turned out okay. We've canoed, we basically used to canoe, we'd canoe the East Sandy or Big Sandy or South Sandy right after the February thaw, usually. Late February, early March, April, when the water was up, because those creeks are really nice creeks, but they don't hold their water very well. So by June or early July, usually June, I guess, you couldn't float them very well. I mean, I don't know how many times. I can remember the kids would float inner tubes down. We would get in at Old Route 8 there, and I remember Bill in particular, we would float with the inner tubes the whole way down because there was enough water. I think it was before Lake Wilhelm. And I feel that Wilhelm kind of reduces the flow of the water into Big Sandy and kind of takes a little bit of the canoeable season, it cuts it back a little bit. One of my most favorite trips on Big Sandy was one summer when a friend of mine, Dave Anderson, and I, my kids, Dave and I used to work together, and I took my canoe to work, and it had rained for 3 or 4 days, and the creek was flooded. Big Sandy was flooded, probably everything else too, but Big Sandy was up. These are no-nos. You shouldn't do what I did, but I had Dave drop me in down at Polk by myself, and I floated that flooded Big Sandy down to Old Route 8. It was like a jungle. The sun was out like it is right now, but it was really hot and steamy, and I canoed over top of stuff that you typically have to go around. It was just a lot of fun. I didn't think it was up, but I don't think it was like dangerous where, you know, it wasn't like 10 feet or anything. It was probably 3 or 4 foot. Another time here, 1971 Hurricane Agnes. I don't know, it rained and rained and rained and rained, and we my brother had a raft, and some of us decided it was a good idea to raft Scrubgrass Creek, and the water was, I don't know, it was the big rock at the hole. The water was going by almost the top of it, and I look back on that, and that definitely was not a good idea, but we did it. East Sandy Creek, I love that creek. I canoed it from Van down to the river, and it's an exciting ride, and it's beautiful country, and just I've not canoed it enough. I mean, back in my younger days, we would get on that creek. A friend of mine, Larry Marshall, knew somebody who lived in the White House at Van by the creek, and they would communicate when the water was up, and we'd all jump in the car and run out and canoe it down. That was a lot of fun. Canoed east. No, that was East Sandy I was just talking about. South Sandy, we would go over to Pearl on Old Route 8 and drive back in. I don't know whether, I forget the name of the road now, but drive in down to the bridge down in the bottoms, and you can almost jump across it there. But when water was up, we would float down there. I spent the overnight in March down there when I took my canoe, and my brother and my cousin took a raft with a couple other people and left us down there to go. We decided to cut the trip short because we didn't start till 2 in the afternoon, and yeah, well, anyways, needless to say, I spent a night out in about 38-degree weather in the rain, and with a raft turned upside down for shelter, but we survived. We've got a lot of mileage out of that story. Oh, yeah, it rained and it was cold, and free advice, always take wax-covered matches and fire starter, and you can always start a fire. Doesn't burn very hot when it's wet, but we finally used a paddle to generate some heat, and we got a little fire going, and by the time my friend Larry Marshall came to round us up at 5 o'clock in the morning, we were pretty toasty by then, but crossing the creek, it was cold again, but we get a lot of mileage out of that story. We can talk to my brother about it, but it was then French Creek. We floated French Creek a number of times. We floated Sugar Creek. My brother and I talked my cousin David McMurdy, and rather spontaneously one Sunday afternoon, he was visiting his mother in Barkeyville to go with us, and he said, well, I've got good clothes on. What if we upset? I said, we've never upset. Never. Well, there's always a first time for everything. Needless to say, it was March or April. The water was cold. David's good Wellington boots and his Sunday clothes got wet and weren't the greatest insulators. Back in those days, seemed like we had nothing but flannel shirts and blue jeans, and as you go on in life, you pick up things like wetsuits and gloves and so forth and so on, so you can do this when it's cold. I had a friend, Bob Trask, who was he became enthralled with kayaking. I was kind of like a very novice kayaker, but on Big Sandy, it was basically a float. So one Thanksgiving, or right around Thanksgiving, in late November, early December, Bob said, let's float Big Sandy. And I don't even know why I asked the question, but Bob, you think I need a pair of gloves? No. He said, boy, get the wetsuit on. Once you're paddling, your blood's flowing, your hands are warm and stuff. Well, that's not necessarily true. It could have killed him. We floated that creek. My hands never warmed up till I got in the car at the end. It was a nice trip. I remember it fondly, but I remember my hands being very cold. And then it was at this point in time that Bob had convinced me that I should actually take up kayaking. So we went down to Slippery Creek at McConnell's Mills, and I had a friend down there, named was Wade Zinter, who was very, very accomplished kayaker, who was trying to teach me to roll my kayak. His idea of incentive was leaving me hang upside down in the water longer and longer and longer, with the idea that I would think I was drowning and I would roll, but it never worked out, and I gave up I gave up on the kayaking. I saw Bob different times, dislocated his shoulder, did some undercut rocks, and looked like he ran through a belt sander with his back and stuff, and I thought, I'm just going to get hurt if I keep this up. So we went basically back to canoeing. We always saved the Allegheny River for when you couldn't canoe the creeks. I started counting up the catches. Like I say, I started canoeing in like early 70s. My brother and I went together and bought let's see here, it was a industrial fiberglass was the manufacturer, and it was called a Pierre Marquette featherweight. It had a pretty flexible bottom, a 16-foot canoe. We bought it off a fellow who had the grand idea that he was going to buy it, take his wife canoeing and fishing, and she rode in at one time and climbed the Tuning dam or lake, and she didn't care for canoeing, so we got a canoe at a reasonable price, used one time. We still have that canoe, so that's 70, we'll say 70 to make easy here. So that's 40 years old. I would say it probably has, I was counting the other day, it probably has somewhere between 15 to 20 fiberglass patches on the thing. The gunnels broke from one of the trips down East Sandy where it wrapped it around a rock, but we just got the saber saw out and cut a big hole in it and patched her up. It's been a fun canoe, and it's not worth anything, but it's just got a lot of memories. Now, Steph and Liza, they used to go canoeing when they were small. One of them they'd take turns riding up on the very point with their feet dangling over the edge in the water. And then we always had the what we call princess style, where two people, the two people were actually running the canoe, and then there was somebody sitting leisurely in the middle of the canoe enjoying the trip.
That was the princess.
But all my kids learned to canoe on Big Sandy, and they are all pretty competent water people. Elias, my grandson, is now taken over on the point riding from his mother. Hopefully we do lots more canoeing, and Bill, my son, he's pretty competent canoer. He fishes a lot and he hunts a lot. He doesn't canoe quite as much, I guess, but every once in a while, him and his buddies will. They floated Clarion River. That's another beautiful piece of water in northwestern Pennsylvania. From clear up above. We used to get into Portland Mills. We canoed that from Portland Mills down to the dam, and actually we've gone up next town up, which I can't remember the name, but it's an absolutely beautiful river, clear, see to the bottom in it, just beautiful piece of water. French Creek, I think I mentioned French Creek. I canoed French Creek from north of Meadville down to the river. It's Carlton down or Utica down to the river is my favorite piece on French Creek. It's just a nice float, and the fishing's good. And, being on the water, it just makes you feel good. Floated Big Sandy from Remelton to the river. We've floated South Sandy, which is a tributary to Big Sandy, from up in Pearl down to where it intersects with Big Sandy, on down to the river. We floated East Sandy from Van down to the river, where it intersects down around Belmar. We floated French Creek from north of Meadville down to the river. We floated on the Allegheny River. I've never been south of Emlenton. I have been as far north, I think, as President. I've never canoed at all in one trip. Usually we have day trips. And Sugar Creek that runs into French Creek, we've canoed that from, I think, out around Cooperstown down to French Creek and down to the river. trying to think here. Bill and I once upon a time even floated a very short stretch of the east branch of Wolf Creek in southern Venango County. It was very short, but it was just something to try, which we did for a very short distance before I fell in and got soaked. You know, and my children, Bill, daughter Stephanie, and daughter Liza, all grew up floating some or all these, all of the creeks and the rivers, and we all have good memories of being out and on the water. And you know, the water, it's really important to, at least to me, I think it is to them too. And you know, my grandchildren, Elias, Hubbas, and Basil Bannister did one of their first trips on the river last year. And we got in at Franklin, and the nice thing about the Allegheny River, particularly in July and August, it's a fairly nice flow trip, and there's some nice islands with sandbars, tips on them, which we would stop and have a little lunch or a little brunch or whatever, and the kids would play in the sand and swim in the little pools alongside the islands, and you know, it was an introduction to things that are important to their parents and the, you know, grandparents here. I mean, it's just getting on the water is just hearing the water is good for your soul, I think. Yeah, it kind of is in at least my blood. The hills and the creeks and the trees here. It's here a while back. I was hiking with Judge White. He said, "I love it here. I love these hills. I love these creeks." There's no place else I'd rather live. Kind of makes me a little bit emotional. But I thought that was well put, and it gave me a little bit of a different perspective, a better appreciation for being here and what we actually have here. So anytime I get a chance, I make excuses for not being on the water as much as I used to be, but really enjoy it. Big Sandy, over my 40 years of floating it, I've seen bear, piebald deer, turkey, lots of fish, fairly good sized reptiles. One time, Liza and my daughters Liza and Steph and I were floating along south of Franklin, about 4 or 5 feet from the bank on the Allegheny. Before they stocked the river otters, there was a river otter just laying there like the pictures everybody sees. He looked at us, we looked at him. He swam underneath the canoe, popped up on the other side on his back and looked at us, and then dived down and went on his way. Just a good memory. Good. We've seen eagles down in the Sandy Creek watershed, as well as along down on the Allegheny. It's nice to see the eagles coming back. I remember in the 70s, you know, if you saw on the blue heron, that was like, wow. Now there's the, I don't know what they call it, a rookery up by the new Route 8 bridge. That they are very common. It's nice to see the wildlife, you know, coming back. I mean, in my lifetime, you know, the eagles are coming back. The osprey have really come back. Turkey have really come back. Lots of, you know, more bear. It's pleasing to see some recovery to things. you know, and you hope that people would be good stewards of the waterways, and that, you know, people for generations get to enjoy, you know, Venango County, northwestern Pennsylvania, just some of the beautiful scenery. Hike the, you know, a little different than canoeing, but my friend Dave Anderson, who I mentioned, he and I would what we call crick hike we'd go up on top of the hill, hike Denison Run down into down to the river, or Bullion Run down to the river in the wintertime, just for a little diversion. I've had friends and colleagues from South Africa and Australia come and visit with me here in Kennerdell, and we've taken them hiking along up Denison Run and Bullion Run and Pine Run, and they're very impressed with you know, what they see. I mean, it's just a little different than their country. I'm sure I find things are very nice there too, but it just, they really enjoyed the time they spent here in Venango County. Back when I was younger, my brother, my cousin John Hanna, I think my cousin Jerry Hanna, were sort of the 20-something crowd that would do these cricks at times. So I would look at the markers there at the old Route 8 bridge, and I'd call my brother and say, hey, you guys want to, you know, you think Johnny and Jerry want to go? And we'd call around, and then, you know, usually everybody was kind of into the canoeing at that time, into I would say it would be a class 2 to 3 whitewater, you know, so not very intense, but fun. So pretty much all of us had a canoe. Johnny had a canoe, Jerry had a canoe, Terry had a canoe, I had a canoe by this time. And we were never the most prepared group of people in the world, I can tell you that. I mean, we had the canoes on the racks a lot of times, but they usually come to my place, get things loaded up. The shuttle was always the big hassle, because if you had more than 2 canoes, you had to have like about 3 vehicles. If you had 2 canoes, you could leave one vehicle with a double rack at the takeout point, and then you could all hop in the car and go through the put-in. We never seemed to have enough money for a boat trailer to be organized, so we always did the car shuttle, and at various times we had old beat-up pickup trucks, and I had an old, I think a 1970 Datsun pickup truck was the first one I had, which was just an adventure in itself. But then we did the canoe camping. Most of the time we did that on the river, so it was just a matter of getting you know, the people who were going to go, same basic people, that my cousins, the Hannas, and my brother, and the kids and stuff, and we put the little flotilla together, and usually it was an overnighter, so we would camp on the islands on the river, and kids would play in the water, and cook breakfast, and just have a pretty good time. And the older I got, the more organized I got. I got nice paddles, I've got nice life preservers now. All the things I wish I'd have had when, you know, when you don't have any money in the, you know. But we did have good Stearns life preservers for all the kids. We, you know, certain things you don't want to be cheap on. But we probably most of our trip, well, the canoe camping with the family mainly on the Clarion River and on the Allegheny. So there was always water to do that. So you just picked a nice weekend. Weather, you know, northwestern Pennsylvania, trying to get the weather to cooperate. Have slept in the rain a time or two. It kind of takes the fun out of the camping with the kids when it's raining. You know, you look back and it's funny now, but it's not so funny at that particular point in time. I tell you, a pair of Keen sandals. They should have had them in the 70s. Best thing since sliced bread. One of the most important planning issues when you're going to do a shuttle is to not rely on one person to have the keys when you get to your down river. Everybody I think should line up and go, all right, who has the keys for the takeout vehicle? Because it's paddling back up the Allegheny River is a chore, let me tell you. And different times you'll hear choice language when you go, oh, I didn't bring the key. So that's probably one of them. If you're making a list, and I'm not a list person, but I would suggest, I had a friend who had a really nice, if you're going to go camping, here's the things that, a little check-off list. Because I'm here to tell you, you forget things. You forget things. I can remember getting in Big Sandy, getting down to the river, taking a break, going to open a Corona, and I forgot my opener. My daughter Stephanie said, here's how you do that. Just for posterity, talk about learning, the kids learning to steer. Stephanie going to college in Marietta, and she goes rafting with some of her friends from college. I think they were all guys, I'm not sure, but they were on the river they did Deliverance on. And Steph, since she's a girl, she's supposed to paddle. They couldn't steer. Steph got pretty angry and said, let me steer, I actually know what I'm doing. And she said things started going quite well after that. Liza and I, we went on the Youghiogheny River one time with Ed Moffat and the church group there. And apparently the minister wasn't that popular with all the teenagers because he got in our raft and there just was no water down there that day. And Liza's up front, go left, right, picking our way through the rocks and stuff. And it looked like we really knew what we were doing. We had a good time. The minister made it okay. So learning to steer is another important component of canoeing, because I've seen more than one testy argument between husband and wife over riding in the same canoe and not knowing how to steer. There's a lot of finger pointing and let me do it, and if you really want to know the names of those people, I can give that to you. Dave and Kelly. Yeah, I'd forgotten one of our trips on the river, on the Allegheny River. My daughters both, I don't know, early 20s, probably still in college, both of them. Steph was up front, supposed to be paddling. Apparently, she got short strawed and had to paddle. Liza got to ride Princess, and I'm paddling and looking, and it didn't take too long to look up, and they're both sleeping. Nobody's helping. But that's that's part of the canoeing. You can get on the Allegheny River and lay back and just float and just enjoy the peace and the quiet for the most part. There are some boats on the river, but it's pretty canoe friendly. It's nice camping at the old Danner place just before you get to Kennerdell. And there's only been one time in my entire lifetime that I saw enough water to float Scrubgrass, and that was during the 1971 Hurricane Agnes hurricane, and there was more than enough water. And the water was so high on that trip down that the two front people in the raft, we would come across the oil pipelines across the creek, which are probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 foot up. That the first two people in the raft would grab that, lift it up in the air, and then the last two would catch it to get underneath it. There was not enough room to get underneath the oil pipelines. I look back on that and I think of how unsafe and impetuous doing that was. It's fun to tell the story, but it's I look back and think that was probably one of the dumber things, at least in the top 2 or 3 dumber things I've done in my life. And it was exciting. It was a quick trip too. Yeah, Tom Smith fell out a time or two, but we rounded him up. I mean, it was, yeah, it really wasn't, yeah, Tom, when on the trip, on this Scrubgrass Creek trip, yeah, Tom Smith, I think, fell out once, and we got him rounded up. But overall, everybody was pretty intent on staying in the raft. It just was not a. It would have been much better for seasoned kayakers to do that trip than greenhorn rafters in a yellow rubber ducky raft with the orange wrap around your neck life preservers. We're probably dry rotted the straps. It was just bad move. Well, we were young, immature. Parents. My brother had purchased one of the yellow rubber ducky rafts that you could buy in those days, which we thought was pretty cool at the time. And nobody had anything but the orange U.S. Coast Guard approved life preservers, and I wouldn't tell you that we had enough of them to go around, but there were some. And we thought it would be a great adventure. We started on, I don't remember what time of the day, it doesn't matter, but the beginning of the trip was quite an adventure, because we went through a 8 or 10 foot culvert which goes under 308, and it was quite a ride. It was like, wow, here we go. And it was all downhill from there. Well, it felt like it was going downhill. If you look at, I don't know what the drop is on Scrubgrass Creek, but there was lots of water. It was very fast. Scrubgrass Creek is a very unforgiving little creek because it's so narrow. You don't get a lot of options. Usually if you're on the river, you have a couple of choices. That's what I mean by forgiving. I mean a stream that'll let you choose an easy route or a more difficult route. Small creeks like East Sandy, Slippery Rock Creek, South Sandy, Scrubgrass, there's only so much latitude that they're going to give you, especially when the water's up. So it makes it pretty exciting. We did have a couple of, I think they were brush clearers. You know, the brush is on there, and when the water takes you underneath some of these, it just brushes you right off of the raft. But we never lost everybody all at one time, and we were able to round people back up. It would have made it quite a good documentary. I've never saw water like that again in Scrubgrass. We got out at the campground. I remember my cousin Jim jumping out and grabbing a tree with a rope and wrapping around the tree so we weren't on our way to Emlenton. Any of my kids would have done that, I'd have been like, no, you're not doing that. Mom and Dad, we probably didn't tell them. I mean, that was like, 71, let's see here. Well, I'd have been about 23 or 24. We did not have the best of equipment back in those days. And we've since given up a lot of that. We have older equipment here. I mean, I really enjoy this, and I've talked different times, and my son-in-law Matt Hubbis and I have talked about building a cedar strip canoe, and we talked about it this year, but when things come up, I had a little health problems, and that kind of threw a damper on that. But it's still something that I wouldn't mind doing at some point in time. And you know, you go online and look at it, and I mean, they're beautiful boats, but something that you could pass on to your grandkids. I mean, if nothing else, you want to pass on the appreciation you have for the water, the trees, the animals, and you know, you want them to enjoy it like you have. It's just such an important part of my life, anyways. Getting out and just I call it creek hiking, where either you're not canoeing when the water's down, you can't canoe. Just hiking up the South Sandy watershed is just it just good for your mind, good for your soul. I read one time where when you have all the bad energy from all the stress and stuff, if you go out and spend time out in the woods, if the trees get rid of the bad energy and give you some good energy. I really think that's true. It's so nice to be out and just enjoy it. And I guess I've never understood how people can come out and enjoy the creeks and the trails and stuff that we have here and not take care of them. If you carry something in, you need to carry it out. If you can carry it in full, you should carry it out empty, whether you're canoeing or hiking or whatever, so that you leave, or riding whatever, so you leave it for other people to enjoy. I mean, we're passing through, and you know, I'd like to think that my great-grandchildren could come to these places and say, it's really nice. Keeping these streams and rivers and creeks clean for future generations is, you know, it's important for our generation to do it. And I guess, you know, what I've learned over the years is, you know, whether you're canoeing or backpacking or whatever, you should try to have as little impact on the environment as possible. You carry something in full, then you surely should be able to carry out the empty packaging or whatever. Fire rings, you know, I've been taught, if there's a fire ring there, use the same fire ring. Don't come up with another one. Just, you know, most people like to feel that maybe they're the first people who saw this or something. You know, which is probably not true around Venango County, but at least it, you know, keeping the streams, the rivers clean. I mean, the Allegheny has been cleaned up. It's sad to think that, you know, you can only eat so many fish out of the Allegheny River in the course of a week because of mercury, and you know, that's sad. I mean, but I don't know how to. Everyone just needs to have as low impact on the environment as possible. I feel, because again, it's beautiful around here, and we just hope that the next generations to come can enjoy the clean water and the trees and so forth and so on. I would guess, you know, if you went back 100 years or so and people saw what we've done to some of the stuff, they'd be a little disappointed. But like I say, there's been a lot of positive things over the last 40 years with the, you know, restoration of wildlife and cleaning up some of the streams that were, you know, not so clean. I've been floating these streams and rivers for, like I say, the last 40 years. I've probably been on the Allegheny, made various trips in the Allegheny, probably, I would guess, maybe 60 to 80 times. I mean, they're typically day trips, overnight. There have been camping trips on the Allegheny, but basically they're day trips, you know, a day or a few hours at a time. Just even if you get out for a half a day, it makes you feel good. I don't know how many times I've been on Big Sandy and the other creeks. Quite a bit. As I've gotten older, I haven't gotten out as much. But when I was younger, it was like a very high priority to get out and enjoy the water. what we said was, if there's water, we're going. That I've forgotten about, the old white 1970 Datsun pickup truck. 2 canoes on the top, as many people as we could pack in the cab, and anybody who didn't fit in the cab was in the bed, the little 6-foot bed underneath the canoes hanging on. Ay, word. Not, as Ralph Nader would say, dangerous at any speed, or unsafe at any speed, I guess. But it got us around a lot. And my cousin John had an old Ford pickup truck, and they were beasts of burden. Well, I guess I would consider myself, I'm certainly not an expert canoer by any stretch of the imagination. I would probably put myself on a scale of 1 to 10, probably, maybe a 5 or a 6 in competency. I mean, I really enjoy getting out there. I love to feel the paddle in my hand. My daughters and my son bought me a great curved blade paddle, which I never thought was necessary, but once you have one, you're like, wow, that is an absolute wonderful piece of, it's a wonderful tool for in the canoe. It's light, it just feels good. It's like a good baseball bat, or I don't know exactly how to explain it, but you feel really good using that in the river. I just thoroughly enjoy being on the water. Just makes you feel alive, makes you feel, or makes me feel, I guess, more in harmony with my surroundings. And it's very hard for me to explain, but it's definitely a positive thing. It's positive energy. It puts a smile on my face, and a little bit of sun on my face also. And if you're camping, the food tastes better. Hot dogs or hamburgers taste better cooked out. And if you're cooking breakfast in the morning, it's like, wow, this is just the greatest. This is great. The fresh air, sitting with your feet in the water, sharing it with your kids or your grandkids. And letting them see something that really is important to you. Well, this shows the immaturity, or maybe I don't know what it shows about me, but I've said different times, okay, when I die, you can play John Prine's Don't Bury Me and Kiss My Ass Goodbye, and put me in the canoe and give me a Viking funeral on the Allegheny. Now, that's probably not going to be quite doable, but I would think you could scatter my ashes in Denison Run off one of the bridges.